All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jacob Surber. I'm a product manager at Twilio, and today we want to talk about launching the console. I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of products over the course of my career, a lot of developer tooling, some design tooling, and even some hardware. But this has been, I think, a really interesting project that I'm interested in sharing with you all. I want to kind of set some expectations for this talk. A lot of what I'm going to talk about here is part of the playbook as to how you might launch a product. But I find it was a really great process for me to even go back through and put this together to think about all the steps that we took to get here, how we shared out across the company, and hopefully you'll be able to take this information back and use it in your day to day. So I do want to set some relatively low expectations that I'm going to blow your mind with some clip art. So let's get into it and talk about the Twilio console. So what is the console? We think about this as the front door for developers. When they come to Twilio, when they log in, this is what they end up seeing. This is where they interact with all of the various Twilio products, how they configure them, how they see them as they're running, view the logs, manage any errors that might come up, deal with billing. This is really the touch point for all Twilio customers. And this, as you know, Twilio has grown tremendously over the last 5, 10 years. We initially launched the console back in 2008 with two products. And you can see from 2010 to 2016, there was reasonable growth. But over the last few years, the offerings for Twilio has really exploded. And this is not even a full listing of the products that we offer. And it's only going to continue to grow. And the console, when it was originally launched in 2008, is still essentially the same today. And so, how did that scale? And how did all of our internal teams develop for it? Early on, and I'm guessing many well, in the several companies that I've talked to about their developer consoles, they followed a very similar arc to where there's a centralized team that develops this interface, the platform for which to expose the different products. But then that team becomes a bit of a bottleneck and starts to slow down the progress of all these product teams who want to support their growing customer base and do very specific things. So ultimately, this original console team was disbanded. And each of the individual product teams were then able to move much, much faster and really serve the needs of their customers. And this was great during our period of growth. But now, as you can see, it's led to some challenges as we've gotten to scale. So when I joined, we actually recreated the console team and looking at how we can create a governance model while still enabling teams to move fast and do what is best for their customer. But still, how can we do things in a consistent fashion? This is the console as it is today. Aesthetically, very 2010s. And this was designed for when most Twilio customers used a single Twilio product. So I could go in and look at messaging or look at voice and everything I would need to work with that product and manage my entire Twilio lifecycle would be nestled under that product. But as we've grown, people are using more and more Twilio products, and it became really redundant as to how you move around. And as well as with all of these teams working on their own applications, we got a very disparate tech stack. So our initiative here has really been re-examine the information architecture, what's going to make our customers the most successful, and then also look at the fundamental technical architecture. How do we enable teams to move faster? How do we improve performance and improve testing and quality? So I want to give you guys a sneak peek at the brand new console. We're in the process of just starting to launch now. So I'm really excited to get this out to the world. Internally, we called this Console Zen. And I think that's one of the most fun parts of creating a new product. You get to come up with a code name. And this code name is going to be really useful internally as you're communicating to people about it, where it's going, and it really starts to set the tone for the vision of this release. So you can see here I've got a nice photo of a big pile of rocks, and that was really how a lot of us viewed the existing console. And our effort here was, how do we take what we have without changing it dramatically, but be able to recombine it in a way that is going to make our users have a sense of Zen. So this is where we are today. We have redesigned the entire left-hand navigation, done a major regrouping into four major areas. So up at the top, we have account and billing. Things like billing and usage, API keys used to be mixed in with all of the various products. And so now we've really streamlined the menu on the left-hand side, but then also divided it into two sections. So develop, this is primarily where you're going to go to configure your application. Um, then we have monitor. We've pulled out all of the logs, all of the various insights products. So once you have actually deployed your application and it's live, you have one place where you can go back to and make sure you're monitoring the health of that application. So how we launch, I think this is probably my favorite image. He's got one gear, he's got all of his stuff strapped to the bike, and he's really approaching this in a very minimalistic fashion. But we do have a shirt policy. So at Twilio, we have what we call the Twilio magic. So these are the base principles, the rules in which our teams function. You can see this on our website. I think it's a great way to learn about the company. But rule number 5 is something we embody almost all the time. It's write it down, and regardless of the phase that you're in, as you're um, uh, coming up with a concept or you're coming up to roll out, make sure you write it down and you can share it. We created a rollout plan. And while this sounds like a very basic thing, I mean, obviously you'd create a rollout plan, but why? This is where it becomes really valuable, where you can share this rollout plan across the company. You can get feedback. You can get into a lot of debates with people about the phases in which you're going to roll out, the metrics that you have at each phase, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But this artifact you get to use at the beginning. I'll say as a PM, this is it's a great artifact that you get to point back to once this is all done and say, I actually did think about this, and it's just a really great thing to have in your back pocket. So I define 4 gates, and again, these are not revolutionary, but they might not also be required for every release. So we're doing an internal beta where we're exposing it to internal Twilio customers, a private beta, so we can expose it to a select group of external customers, public, where we just open it up to anybody that wants to opt in, and then general availability. And I don't get too much into general availability here, but I think that's an entirely separate talk, where it's, how do you start to migrate customers who are happy in an existing experience into something that they may want to go into, they may not want to go into, but there's another real challenge there with migrating customers. But we're gonna take some time and actually walk through these, and what makes each of these phases special and what you need to think about. So documenting your goals. At each of these phases, you want to try and reach different people. But the real question is why? What's the motivation for talking to internal customers, external customers, influencers? Um, at what phase, or I'm sorry, what are the phases of this release process? You may choose to drop out some of those. You may not need a public beta if you're going to have a private beta. Maybe you jump straight to GA, and that's just fine for your product to your company. Um, and then I think most importantly, what's the impact of each of these phases? And you have to think about that as you're documenting the metrics or the gates for each step. How long do you want to be in internal beta? What are the success metrics that mean you get to move to the next one? And this is really going to be one of the harder things to think through, and I can guarantee you something that will incite a lot of debate internally. Um, and then what would you like these? What would you like to happen in each of these steps? So, are you improving quality? Are you exposing it to more and more people? Are you looking to collect a certain amount of feedback? So we'll talk about what we're implementing for this rollout here shortly. So documenting the requirements. So this is really a lot of what's in the document as well. So functional requirements. As we talk about an internal beta, all features and functionality might not be there. If you're in a safe space, you may want to be able to get out certain pieces of functionality to internal users to get that feedback, and as well as quality standards. So if I'm at a private beta, all of my SLOs might not be in place. That service could go down. These are not guarantees that we currently have with customers in a private beta, but you may want to think about as you look at a public beta or GA. And then input and output metrics. So as we dig into metrics a little bit later, I found this a really useful way to think about uh, how you're grading your progress. And so they have very different impacts as to how you manage your day-to-day roadmap versus how you're grading yourself on this rollout. So internal betas. I think a win test is really a great analogy here, to where it's a controlled environment. You can tweak a lot of little things and run another test again, but at the end of the day, it's inherently friendly. So what do you do during this internal beta? I think the most important thing is to make it easy for people to submit feedback. Especially now that we're all working from home, there's so many different communication channels. And if you are having sales folks or support engineers or leaders of other BUs messaging you feature requests or emailing you, it's going to get really difficult to track all of this different information. So we actually put a banner up at the top of the site with a link to a little Jira field. So we could collect bugs, we could collect requests, um, and then it was all tracked. We could prioritize it, we could move it into different sprints, different release gates. It became a really easy way to manage this feedback. Now, as a product manager, focusing on the comms and being the real champion for your product is probably the most important thing. As people across the company, really large or small, they know less about the product than you think they do. And so this is really where communicating these phases, communicating the expectations for them and how they can get involved is really super, super important. And then publicizing this progress. So all of these people are spending their time to go through your product and submit bugs or feedback. Make sure that you have a mechanism to make sure that they're being heard, that things are being addressed. Again, Jira boards work for this, but also sending out some communications about milestone releases. And all of this really gets summed up with over communicate. This Every additional communication you send is only going to instill more and more confidence in your organization about the release that's coming up. Something to be not overlooked is celebrating. You know, your team might have been working on this for months, a year, more, and so make sure you take time to celebrate as a team. As many of us are distributed these days, make sure you get together. At the end of a day, make sure you're celebrating these milestones or big sprints towards the end. As a company, are there places where you can get up in front of an all hands and really shine the light on the team as to the great work that's being done? And then as a company, I even look at this opportunity as a great way to celebrate what we're doing that I get to share with the rest of my company and the team. Then again, with the customers, as you talk with the customers, make sure they know what's gone into this. It's a great way of building empathy, especially during a private beta. They may not know how much work has gone into this or when things go wrong, if you have that rapport and that sense of empathy, it really encourages them to contribute more. And it requires a lot of tools. So, as even as Twilio, we're a relatively large company. We can't rebuild all of these things internally. So we've really cobbled together a large set of tools to implement to help us with each section of this journey. And I'll talk about a lot of them today. I don't want to make this sound like a commercial for a lot of these tools, but they all play an important role. And that build versus buy debate, you can get up and running using a lot of these tools much faster and be able to integrate them into your workflow. So how are we rolling this out? You can see up here at the top, all of this migration really boils down to a tiny button up in the masthead. It says try the beta console. But then behind that, it requires a lot of support and technology. So we see here, this is where split starts to come into play. Um, what I've been able to do here is define a treatment. So in the on treatment, that button is shown, and in the off treatment, it's not. We've actually taken that button, just a basic React component, and wrapped it with a way that it can talk to split. And so it'll know if that treatment is on or off and be able to hide and show. And the next part is starting to come up with your targeting rules. So what you can see here, and I'm going to have to get a little bit closer. This is for our internal rollout. You can see for the on treatment, I've actually allowed users with an @Twilio, an @SendGrid, or an @Segment email. When they log in, they get to see this treatment, and you take that traffic allocation and you ratchet that up because you want to expose it to everybody in the organization. Now, as we get to the private beta, probably as many of you have picked up cooking as a hobby during the pandemic for sanity's sake, but there's this concept of mise en place, and this is it's French for everything in its place. As you get to the private beta, you want to make sure that everything is ready. This is really a dry run for your customers, and you, know, you want to make sure that everything is just ready to go. So in this, you can see I've grayed out a set of user SIDs. Now, this was very useful as we took some very specific customers to bring them in and throw their user SID in there, and that would expose them to the opt-in. Another path that we ended up taking, you may be able to see here on our uh, disallow list, um, HVC. So I went into Split and created a segment and named it HVC for high value customers. So I wanted to actually exclude folks that have support contracts, that have significant numbers of engineers or spend from this early phase of the process. They have a lot at stake here, and I don't want to uh, chance anything with those kinds of customers. So the next piece is defining this rules. So here is really where that slow roll starts to come out. And you may be able to see here, I'm actually exposing 1% of our total traffic to the opt-in button. Now, day over day, I've been able to increase that, and so this starts to decrease certainty, or I guess increase certainty in the rollout, maybe. And so this is allowing me to say, all right, service is staying up. There's not a massive disconnect in how people are interacting with the product, and then also allows me to take the feedback that I'm getting from customers and consume it. If I open it up to 50% right out of the gate, I wouldn't be able to manage all of that, and I'd be running around like a crazy man. So let's talk launch metrics. What are the things that you're going to look at through these different phases to make sure you are on track, that customers are being successful? And the first piece is really knowing your customer. So as people are opting in, who's opting in? You'll get a basic readout that 1,000 people are in your beta. Great. But from our standpoint, we have a wide variety of personas that come into the console, And I want to start to be able to break down the feedback that's coming by the kind of customer that they are. So here I'm asking, are you a developer? Are you a product manager? Are you in marketing? And this will let me segment the data and I think help prioritize the different aspects of feedback coming in. The next piece is looking at your adoption rate. So you can see I've got a chart here on the left that is showing uh, the number of people exposed to the beta button. So this was just after a couple of days, and it's been shown to 3,000 people, and a little over 300 have opted in. So I've got an 11.5% opt-in rate. That's not bad. I feel like I would like it to be more. So what we've created is an extra nudge. So after a period of time that a user's been exposed to the opt-in button, this nudge will trigger and really let them know. Maybe they didn't see the button. Maybe they looked at it but bailed out. And so this becomes an opportunity where we can give them a nudge and potentially a little bit more information. So the instrumentation of your application is super important. So we are leveraging several tools here. So Rollbar, Datadog, and Segment. Rollbar is a great tool to let you know if there's actually errors occurring in the front end application. This is super important because customers may run into a page that doesn't load or renders incorrectly. But if you don't have it instrumented correctly, they may not leave feedback. They might just see it and opt out. You have no real idea why. Datadog is going to let us know the full stack of our system. How are the backend systems performing? How many API calls are being made? What's the latency for those API calls? And really lets you know from a health standpoint how your application is starting to scale as more and more users come in. And Segment, another fantastic tool, but this is really giving us insight into how the users are using your application. I have ideas on personas, but there's a great persona tool inside of Segment that will really look at what different kinds of users are starting to interact with inside of the application, and then allow you to start to again prioritize your fixes and think about your roadmap by the kinds of people coming to your application. Customer feedback. For as much as it may hurt sometimes, we really do have to listen and again be able to communicate and follow up with different users. So we have a few different ways that we are collecting feedback. One, this was a relatively quick and easy way to drop in leveraging Hotjar. So it gives you a little feedback widget over on the screen. You can click it, they can rate. And what's really nice about this, not only can they leave some free form feedback, also takes a screenshot of the screen. This helps both me and the team really diagnose any issues that a customer might be reporting. Now, the next is we leverage Corelu. So this is a surveying platform. Again, a relatively easy way to drop in some nice targeting rules where I can start to ask customers who've been to the console and say 3 days this week, like, what are you starting to think about this? Or if they've been in the beta for 2 weeks, I could launch a larger survey and get some more in-depth feedback. It's a great way to get the proactive feedback from our customers. It's leaning on them to tell you what they think of the application. And the next is having a bit of sympathy. I mean, this is a new product. They do need a way to get out. Many of the tools that we're launching are mission critical for customers. It's how they manage their livelihood. And so you need a way for them to revert, especially early on. As I referenced earlier, when you get to more of a GA, this starts to flip. And so how do you really keep those people in? But at that point, you've got much higher confidence in the application at that point. So from a metric standpoint, you have to watch your opt-in rate. How quickly are people bailing out? How long have they been in the product before they bail out? This starts to tell you from an early point. Are people being successful in the tool, or are they not? Are they able to find the things that they're looking for? If this number gets too high, it might be time to pause the beta and reevaluate. Reach out to some of the customers that have opted out and find out why. And this really becomes the big challenge. So when you click, what are some of the questions you might ask? We came up with I think 3 or 4 questions that are pertinent to the beta itself. Some people might just be coming in to check it out. They don't really have any plan on staying, and so you need to be able to filter out that data. Um, People might be running into bugs, or they can't actually complete the task they came to complete. The other really important piece here is let them leave their email address. Follow up with these folks. This is, again, a really great time to connect with your users. All right. So we've arrived at the public beta. Now, we've been talking a lot about input metrics. So, what's going on during, from a day to day level during this rollout? But if we switch a little bit and talk to output metrics, these are often lagging metrics, ways that you can look back on what's been done and try and measure its success. And the biggest way to do this is to create a research plan. Again, going back to our core principle of write it down. What are the goals that you want to start to see out of this research plan? What are the phases? What are you going to be researching at each phase? And for us, we've put this into 2 categories. So targeted surveys. You know, I've brought up surveys multiple times, and survey fatigue is really a thing. And to get somewhere between 5 to 10% conversion rate on your survey is pretty good. And at the end of the day, that's not a ton of data. So when can you ask the right question to the right customer at the right time? As we've changed things inside of console, we have some specific open questions, and so we've been able to distill those down into a lot of one question asks. How hard was it to find this thing? Or was it hard to complete this specific task? And so the rate in which we get responses from one question surveys is much better. The next is building out a customer advisory board. This is a much smaller subset than a beta. So this public beta may have thousands of people in it, but a customer advisory board has a handful of folks where you can have ongoing dialogue. It's a place where they feel empowered to tell you their own ideas. You can share out NDA information, again, it's another great way to have very tight loops of feedback. To maintain this advisory board, it's super important to consistently engage. If it gets stagnant and there's not conversation, customers start to ignore it and start to move on. And the last bit is make sure you keep this group refreshed. So you're not over-indexing on a certain type of user, and you're maintaining these diverse perspectives. Then from an output metric standpoint, we've really relied on the heart framework. So this is something that Google's been championing for the last few years. And it's essentially a way to measure the happiness of your customer, the engagement of the customer, the adoption of this product, and its retention, as well as success around specific tasks. So this is just a great way that as you build out your research plan, follow these steps, and it'll give you a pretty holistic view on how successful customers are being. And then most importantly, make sure you've built tools, a platform, and a team that can iterate quickly. You're going to get feedback that you need to make changes right now, or you need to inject things into the next sprint. Make sure you're leaving room inside of your sprint to inject critical bugs, or that you can reprioritize different epics. And these are all expectations that you set with the team, that you set with other stakeholders inside of the company, but you need to be prepared to iterate. So, doing a recap here, document the launch plan, be able to socialize it and get feedback, iterate there. Make sure you're celebrating with the team each of these milestones. Define the metrics for each of these milestones, stick to them. Again, celebrate the success of those milestones, those meeting those metrics. If you're not meeting those metrics, make sure you have a mitigation plan. What are you going to do if you're not seeing the opt-in rate that you're looking for? And then lastly, make sure you have that research plan. How are you going to inform the next 3 steps of this product? And when you have a beta, it's a great time to interact with customers. And lastly, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. There again was nothing super special that we're uncovering here, but I think it's important to know that every company of every size is approaching this in slightly different ways. But we can learn from each other, and nobody's necessarily doing this in a fundamentally better way. And as a PM, make sure you reserve the right to wake up smarter. There's things that I'm going to learn today that tomorrow are going to be even more valuable. And just because you have a plan in place doesn't mean you can't. With that, thank you all very much, and I look forward to talking with you all in Slack.